Kia ora, talofa, haere mai, namaste, and welcome to today's episode of The Niche Cast. And on the menu today, we are going to recap the Blackcaps Test Series draw with South Africa after losing the second test to South Africa. And we'll probably get into some Blackcaps Summer, Test Summer review type stuff as well, because it is the end of the Test Summer. It's over just as it started, Wildcard. It's a shout out to 3 test series. I think that's the most undercover, under the radar thing about that South African series is how fucking good would it be to have a third test against South Africa. Would have loved it. Anyway.
And the Bangladesh one too. Bangladesh could have used a third test.
Indeed. So we got some Blackcaps. We got some White Ferns World Cup stuff coming up. Oh, fuck. Let's start again. Holy cow. Just remember, like, if you're going to come in, give us some signal. Because otherwise I just talk over the top of you and there's no point. So I can stop if you've got something, like if your face or something is coming in, like you're going to say something. But if you just pop up, I just keep talking.
That was a one sentence thing though. It doesn't matter if there's a slight overlap on that. I wasn't going to go further, but
yeah, but it happens
certainly not during the intro.
Like, give a signal or do some facials to, because in the variety show as well, I just fucking kind of steamrolled what you're saying. Right. Kia ora, talofa, haere mai, namaste, and welcome to today's episode of The Niche Cast. We're coming at you on a glorious Thursday morning here in Aotearoa. Big it up to Aotearoa, big it up to Aotearoa Sport, and big it up to yourself for being a champion of humanity here on planet Earth. Today's episode of The Niche Cast, we are going to explore some Blackcaps Test cricket thoughts. Blackcaps lost the second test to South Africa. Blackcaps drew the test series against South Africa 1-1, and the Blackcaps finished their test summer 2-2. So we're going to recap some Blackcaps test cricket ideas, and the first of which is a big old shout out to 3 test series. I think we would have enjoyed a third test against South Africa, and would have been nice just to wrap it up with a hearty third test, and also Bangladesh as well. That one finished as a drawn series. So maybe the undercover champion of the test summer is a third test, the mystery third test. But we're going to talk a lot of Blackcaps. We've got some White Ferns. They are kicking off their Cricket World Cup campaign as well. So we're just going to keep the cricket in the spotlight here for the Niche Cast. But I do have a very funky topic I want to start the podcast with the Wobbly Wildcard. Early in the week, we record the Patreon podcast. It's a big old Monday Kiwi sporting recap, and that is there for the Patreon whānau. And big it up to the Patreon whānau. That is the best way to support the Niche Case and what we're doing. So if you do enjoy the yarns with our little typing up on the keyboard type of yarns, or if you do enjoy the podcast yarns, join the Patreon whānau, patreon.com/EL Niche Case, our Niche Case. And yeah, just a beautiful way to support the Niche Case and what we're doing on our mission to broadcast Aotearoa sporting excellence. And we're always trying to return the favor as well with an extra podcast and other stuff for the Patreon whānau. So big it up to the Patreon whānau, and big it up to anyone else who wants to support the Niche Case via Patreon. We always deliver a email banger on Monday and Fridays via Substack, thenichecase.substack.com, and that goes out every Monday and Friday evening with all the Niche Case content right there. You got your links to the articles, you got all the podcast information in those emails as well, and then you get extra content. So I might break down some Redcliffe Dolphins under 18s. I might break down some junior Kiwi NRL mahi. Quick note, Wildcard, what are you thinking about for your Friday email? Tease?
Remains to be seen. It's on a Thursday morning. I haven't got that far yet. That's later today's effort. But there could be a little bit of flying Kiwi stuff. There's one or two midweek games that I might want to address. I will have a Stephen Adams article up later today, and there might be some, might be some spillover that makes it into that. We'll see how it goes.
So hit it
Might
up.
even
The
talk
Niche
about his
Cage.
sister.
There we go. TheNicheCage.substack.com, all the Niche Cage content, as well as extra yarns. And of course, we're always writing about Aotearoa sport at theniche-cage.com. In-depth, insightful, full of clarity, and Aotearoa spiritual guidance as well. So if you like all that, head on over to theniche-cage.com. We keep it funky, we keep it fresh, and we always start our podcast wildcard with a dose of mindfulness. Hit them up.
Yeah, nice, simple, relatively well-known one here. I'm just going with a relatively breezy J.R. Tolkien quote, who said, "Not all those who wander are lost." I always quite like that. Whenever I hear that, it always feels like a spark, It's one of those like sort of how would you say, like, because a couple of the quotes recently we've talked about like the journey over the destination kind of thing. If you think about like the definition of wandering being like, just traveling without a destination in mind. And I like how that one just sort of like, it's sort of emboldens that process, it glorifies the idea of just like wandering without a destination, saying you don't have to be lost to be out there just figuring your way around. And it's very easy to like transverse that onto just like general life ideas as well, when you think about like no one really knows what they're doing. Like everyone's just trying to figure things out on the fly as we go along. But that doesn't have to mean that you're lost. It doesn't have to mean that you're out of control or you don't know what you're doing or things like that,
Indeed. And now would be a great time just to wander. Like now is as good a time as any, given what we're experiencing in Aotearoa and around the world. Just go for a wander. Whatever that means to you, just have a wander. I am curious if anyone out there listening has great information on this idea. The Indigenous Australians, they've got their walkabouts idea where you just go walkabouts, and it's like a spiritual experience. You just go walkabouts and, that wandering thing. You're not lost, you're just out there wandering. And there's all sorts of other like rite of passage spiritual experiences, maybe a sweat lodge type of thing with the Indigenous Native American type of people. I wonder what the Aotearoa Māori version of that is. Maybe there's something I need to learn. Like, what's the walkabout experience for the Indigenous folk of Aotearoa? What is the rite of passage experience for the Indigenous folk of Aotearoa? Because I might want to dabble in it one day. That's that Aotearoa spirituality coming in.
Yeah, and those things are always very like entwined with nature as well, which is always also a good, like they can't be a coincidence that you got so many cultures around the world who have these ideas of like the coming of age ceremony that involves like going out into nature or experiencing it in some kind of overwhelming way, and the idea that you come back like a changed person or an evolved person in some kind of fashion as well. Like it's one of those almost like definitive myth type things that so many cultures have. And when you see them popping up like independent of each other, at times where there's obviously, no one's copying each other's homework back in them days, like it's obviously something that's a core part of the human experience. That's like if it's being replicated in so many different cultures like that. So, whenever those things, I think it's always good to pay attention to those kind of things when they happen in that way.
Shout out to all the wanderers out there, the Niche Cage wanderers. That's what we are. Hopefully, If you're a wanderer yourself, that's what you are. Pick it up, Niche Cage Aotearoa wanderers. Wildcard. One of the funkiest storylines we've been tracking just keeps on getting funkier and funkier and funkier, as Stephen Adams and the Memphis Grizzlies just steamroll on. Obviously, Ja Morant is just he's blowing up. He's blowing up off the hardwood. Like, he has got bombs in his shoes that explode every time he jumps for the hoop. Ja Morant is like just bonkers. He's a superstar, and he is the leader, I'd say, of the Memphis Grizzlies, where Steven Adams is doing a fine job as maybe a more Aotearoa spiritual type of leadership. On the court, Ja Morant's the leader. Off the court, maybe Steven Adams. We'll give him that honor, the leader of the Memphis Grizzlies. Everything is escalating a wee bit. And as this escalates towards the obvious conclusion of NBA Finals, maybe a championship for Steven Adams, I think we need to touch base with this mainly weekly, let's say, because we just got to keep checking it off. Got to keep track of this one, because the Memphis Grizzlies are definitely heading to the NBA Finals with Steven Adams. One, I want to come to you for the update, but also I am observing your learning of basketball in the same way, because we are, like a lot of these sports, we are learning how to actually play the sport, how excellence looks in that sport to best relay how the Kiwis fit in. So obviously, I'm far more spiritual than I am for a 1-out. So I'm not going to try fight people. So I'm not very well versed in the art of fighting, but with so many fighters from Aotearoa in the UFC, got to learn how to fight. I've got to learn how to assess these fights, and I've got to learn the techniques and the art of mixed martial arts. And that's something that I've been doing. Even like cricket, you're always learning about cricket. You're always learning rugby league to progress our mission here. And you're learning about basketball. And I'm fairly confident saying that you wouldn't have been like tuned in to some of the stuff that Steven Adams is doing right now when you like started following Steven Adams in the NBA. Because the stuff Steven Adams does, like, yeah, of course, you would have known, like, okay, he got a rebound. That's good. Okay. Yeah, he's doing, he made a pass. That's good. Like, I think back to when Oklahoma City Thunder were in the like playoffs and finals way back 2014-ish. Young Steven Adams, I have memories of young Steven Adams making passes as well in that arena, just off the top of my head. But my point here is like some of the stuff that Steven Adams is doing for the Memphis Grizzlies right now is real intricate. Like, again, I'm going to use the word steamroll because that's what Steven Adams does down low in the paint. That's not intricate. Steven Adams is literally moving people out of the way for Ja Morant, but it is a technique. It is an art of basketball that I'm fairly confident you wouldn't have been like breaking that down 5 years ago. But right now you're able to see what the Memphis Grizzlies are doing nicely with clarity, and assess how Steven Adams fits into their system and a lot of the real intricate things that Steven Adams is doing for Ja Morant, for the Memphis Grizzlies as a whole as well. So the floor is yours to update us with Steven Adams and the Memphis Grizzlies, but I wanted to start there with what you're learning about basketball through Steven Adams' assessments.
Yeah, all of those things. It's like, I mean, I don't think you ever stop learning full stop. Like as a human being, you'd be on your deathbed, still picking up new information, right? That's just how we operate. And if you like put time and effort into trying to write about sports, and obviously you're going to be picking up new things. Like you never, I think it's like I'm sure it's probably like the death of a sports writer anyway, to get to a point where you think you know everything and like close yourself off. And it's probably the same with any any situation. You think you know everything, you close yourself off to new information. That's when that's the moment in which you stop moving upwards and start moving downwards. So Shoshin mindset, always learning. Like football stuff, I'm always as fascinated as anything, just to get into, like, especially because a sport like that evolves quite quickly, and the in tactics change every couple of years depending on which team's been successful and which team everyone else wants to copy at the moment. And so it's like, you can't stay still there anyway. But I'm always fascinated, like reading about stuff, how coaches' minds work. Like Pep Guardiola has done some incredible interviews that are just up on YouTube. To listen to him talk about the sport is crazy. And basketball, yeah, for sure. Like there's, it's almost like it takes a focus on a guy who is effectively like extremely good at it, but effectively a role player for his team. He's not out there to score all the points or anything. It's Steven Adams, right? It takes someone like that following them closely to see the intricacies of how a play unfolds beyond just like Ja Morant gets the ball, Ja Morant scores the ball. Yeah. And that's one of the fun things about writing about Steven Adams stuff is that you do get to break those things down because he's like a conduit for it. He's like a direct, you mentioned him as like the spiritual leader. You can imagine him as being like, the stories we're talking about before. It's like the young hero goes on. There's always like the older, wiser, the like the village elder or something like that who will like guide them through the journey, like someone who's been there before. Steven Adams kind of operates in that role for Memphis a little bit. Certainly when it comes to like their big man guys. And I mean, he's the oldest guy on that roster, which is kind of crazy because it still feels a little bit weird to think of him as like not the dude up and coming trying to prove himself. There's things like that he does, which it's not just that I wouldn't have noticed it. I think people in general, if you're not looking for it, basketball fans won't see it. You have to not train yourself to see it because you can see it if you want to see it, but like a screen happens kind of just ever so slightly, not out of picture, but like in the edge of the frame kind of thing. You're following the guy with the ball. It does take like a step back sort of thing to look at that. So that's really like, that has been like, I won't say has been, it is continually fascinating just to stop and break down plays and things that you wouldn't even say. Like there was a couple clips that I tweeted out so I could put them into the next Steven Adams write up about just like his screens, like one big screen down low and one up high, and the way in which Ja Morant just like the connection that the two have. Like that's a little bit more obvious than other things, but it's still like you don't necessarily focus on screen assists unless you get a little bit deeper. So like that stuff is always fun to have to think about. And I mean, as far as the Grizzlies go, they came back from the All-Star break. Ja Morant was probably still sweating a little bit of tequila from his system, and they were a little bit sloppy against Minnesota, lost that first game back, and then Morant scored like 46 against Chicago. Memphis ground out a good win there against a very good team, and then did the same thing a couple of days later against the Spurs, where Morant scored 52 and was like probably the best game of his career. Like there was just highlights throughout the whole thing. Like he has a game like that, and he has like a season's worth of insane highlights for a regular player. He's doing that in one game. But two in particular, the one, the dunk on Jakob Poeltl, and the like buzzer beater like 2 minutes later at the end of the first half, second quarter, where just like picked up the ball, turn, spin, throw it down from a rough angle. Both of those plays came from long Steven Adams passes, which is also fun to like. One of them was one of his old mate like quarterback throws. I wrote a little bit about that in the write up today as well. Like this is well, first of all, he threw a pass just like that to Zion Williams like in the Chicago game, like the 2 nights before. But like there was a famous one to Dennis Schroeder to send a game to overtime for the Thunder. I'm sure he had 1 or 2 for the New Orleans Pelicans. Like this actually like the full court inbound sort of heave thing that he does. He's been doing that for a few years for a few different teams. Like that's him instigating that play as well, which is cool. A little bit of history there. You mentioned like that he used to whip out like I'm sure it's. Like I can remember one crazy pass in particular when it must have been in that 2016 run where they made the conference finals. I can remember him just firing like top of the key, just like baseball pitching a pass through traffic to I think Andre Robertson or someone like that. Like I can picture that clearly in my head. So I'm sure there would have been plenty others like that. Because I think that's true. I think he's always been like a high caliber passer for his position. Maybe hasn't like, it probably just took a few years to like get it consistent enough to where he's confident with it, because he's not someone who just tries things in a game like willy-nilly. He does tend to need to I mean, how often have you seen him working on, like, every offseason he's working on 3-pointers, he's still not popping them up every game. But also I think maybe to earn the trust of coaches. And there's one thing like Darko, I can't remember his last name. Coach Darko is he's a Serbian assistant coach for the Memphis Grizzlies. Used to work with Steven Adams for like a couple seasons at OKC. He was an assistant there. He was the guy apparently when they traded for him. He's like, this guy is a better passer than anyone realizes. We need to utilize this more. Fast forward, and he's averaging like 3.8 assists or something like that per game this season. I think it's like a shade under 5 for the month of February just gone. Like the screens are something that there's like he was doing that with Russell Westbrook at a high volume as well, and Ja Morant. It's the same thing. It's awesome. The boost and assists feels like the thing that's been like the major evolution for him this season. And as it happens, last month or two, like he's getting better and better at this with like more volume as the season goes along. Probably play like, the numbers he's putting up and that he did put up in February are the best he did all season. He might be kind of peaking at the moment as far as the Grizzlies go. Like not peaking, but like on his way. He's getting better and better and more influential as he gets more used to this new team. All of which just adds up to just this incredibly fun and exciting Memphis Grizzlies team who, I agree, championship or bust. Why not, eh? All the way.
I'm going full hundies on that idea for the whole podcast, because I'm going to say Memphis Grizzlies are going to the NBA Finals. I'm going final, not quite championship or bust.
Yeah, fair enough.
They're going to the finals
just slightly,
and they might win. White Ferns, they're going to the Women's World Cup final, and the Blackcaps are going to the World Test Championship final. So just hold those three in the pocket. All three are happening, and I'm embracing it. I'm going full hundies, motherfucking positive thoughts, energy, vibrations here. So how are the White Ferns going to get to the Cricket World Cup final wildcard? They face the West Indies tomorrow on Friday. Highly winnable game. The West Indies have lost both their warm-up games and Shoshin mindset, keep learning. Warm-up games for World Cups. So why do we need to take them with a grain of salt? Well, we look at the White Ferns versus Australia, and like 8 or 9 different bowlers were used by Australia. The White Ferns like chased down a massive target. Sophie Devine hit 160 runs or whatever. Amelia Kerr was fantastic with the bat as well. And I was listening to Australian coach Matt Mott talk about their, just what they were doing in that warm-up game. And he was saying how the warm-up games, the point is to put players in difficult situations, preparation for the World Cup. So you've got like bowling option number 5, 6, 7 are bowling in adverse situations under pressure. So we think about the Blackcaps, go back in history. It's like, yeah, this is the time where we bring back Shane Bond into the attack. 35th over, we need a wicket, Shane Bond comes on. When the pump is being put on you, you want your best bowlers coming into the attack. Where in these warm-up games, it's the number 5, 6, 7 bowling option who are being given the chance to work at their craft under pressure. So I say that because, again, we're taking these warm-up games with a grain of salt. And I just want to kind of flush the dunny with those games in the same way I want to flush the dunny with the Blackcaps loss vibes and keep it positive there. But it does... So yeah, flush the dunny with the warm-up games. I'm not really taking too much away from the warm-up games in a similar, like good or bad. I'm remaining neutral. Same way with the Indian series. That was still slightly warm-uppy. So I'm staying neutral there, not taking too good, not going too bad, staying neutral, coming into the World Cup, still doing my best to release all the bull caca that is we have discussed on podcasts, that I've written about on the website. Just trying to release all of that and come into this World Cup with positive energy, positive vibes. And they face the West Indies. So again, West Indies have lost both their warm-up games. But what did I just say about warm-up games? So it's an interesting dynamic. I think generally in the world of cricket, the Windies are below the White Ferns. And I think it's a good starting point for the White Ferns in this World Cup. Interestingly, this game is at Bay Oval. And the White Ferns, all their cricket to this point has been, they played the games in Queenstown, and then I think their warm-up games were in the South Island as well. And as you know, Wildcard, as our listeners know, big understanders of grounds in Aotearoa, of geographic locations in relation to cricket in Aotearoa. Bay Oval, one of the most spinny pitches in Aotearoa. West Indies, they come from spinny conditions, so that might be a factor. And the White Ferns, they do have spin options, Francis Mackay in conjunction with Amelia Kerr, but it is a predominantly seam-heavy bowling unit. Hold that thought for the Blackcaps. So I am intrigued about this White Ferns World Cup. They play tomorrow, 2 p.m. day-nighter at Bay Oval against West Indies. Winnable game by the vibe check coming into it. And anything other than a win would be weird, I think. And I don't want to even explore what happens if they lose. I'm coming in easily winnable game, I believe, for this White Ferns team. And to make a genuine statement, they dominated India in a warm-up series. They lost to Pakistan in the first warm-up game, and then they were relatively excellent against Australia in that warm-up game. So I think if they can defeat the West Indies in convincing fashion, that's going to send a statement to the rest of the World Cup that, you know, they're out here, nothing to fuck with, and they're going to defend Aotearoa home soil.
Yeah, why not? might as well. I mean, to be honest, like, yes, there's been a lot of selection-y drama stuff and like just weirdness of players not getting selected who should have, and coach out here trying to say these are the best 15 players available when it's just blatantly obvious that there's at least 2 players who absolutely should be there ahead of not just like within the 15, but probably within the 11. Things like that, yeah, clearly. And the troubles that they've had with results over the last 2-3 years, it's not been good at all. None of which tells you that this is a team that's going to come into a home World Cup and like be successful and challenge to win the whole damn thing. But I mean, same point we've made a few times, like when they have won games in recent years, it's been because of one of their star players. Normally is just like player of the day level. Satterthwaite scores 100, or Bates or Amelia Kerr takes a bunch of wickets or scores some runs, or little bit less Sophie Devine in the one-day stuff. Best 2020 player in the world, but not so much in the one-day stuff. But still, she's in that same caliber and can have as we saw in that, didn't see it, but as we read from the scorecard in that Australia warm-up game, clearly someone who can like win a chase almost on her own. That level of talent, like they haven't always had. Like they not just haven't. They just straight up have not had all of those star players available together in the same team for a couple years now. And like if they're a team that needs one of their best 4 players or whatever to be the best performer on the day for them to win games, Well, it helps if you have 4 of them playing and not just 2, right? If you got 2, you only get to toss the coin twice. You got 4, you have 4 tosses of the coin. You got like, twice the chance of one of them just coming off brilliantly. And, maybe someone else chips in with a 50 and there you go. Like there's, or 2 of them do, and there you go. And you've chased down 300 in a warm-up game against Australia or something like that, They haven't had that like full strength capacity for a little while. And getting that back now, and getting it back at a time where yes, it was a warm-up game, but Sophie Devine needed those runs just to hammer things home, because she hadn't really been doing that against India. Susie Bates was in fantastic form in the domestic thing. There was 100 against India, I think, as well. Amelia Kerr's just been batting brilliantly. A little bit more of a worry wickets wise, because that has been an issue for a while as well. It's just them not being able to bowl teams out, and that's something that will need to change to do well at the World Cup. But they have form players and they have available players, and sometimes that's all you need rather than the perfect 11. Like obviously the team makeup could be a little bit better, but I mean, you don't really have to look any further back than the 2019 men's ODI World Cup, where we were saying similar things about the Blackcaps going into a tournament. They don't know their best 11, and they didn't. Like they had time to figure this out, and they didn't. They dropped Colin Munro. They recalled Colin Munro. I think Tim Southey was sort of dropped from the ODI team around that time, in the squad, obviously, but not Matt Henry, Lockie Ferguson, guys like that getting picked ahead of him. And fair enough too on ODI form. Like that was probably the right thing. And they weren't flash in the group stages. Like there was a game that was rained off, I think, against Australia, or it might have been India. There was another game against one of those two, I can't remember which, where they got kind of thrashed. I think it might have been Australia, smoked them. But they took care of most of the games, whether it was comfortable. Like I think there was a 10-wicket win against Sri Lanka from memory. There were a couple others, like I think there was the West Indies game, was very tight towards the end. But they took care of business enough to get in the semi-finals, and then just clicked. Had a brilliant performance against India over 2 days, because there was the one, I think, where there was a rain delay and they had to come back and finish it the next day. But great performance against India, dictating the game as well. Like in that way, the way that they that Blackcaps team likes to shrink the game, be like, we can handle the pressure better than you, so let's just make it a shorter, a smaller totals kind of affair, and make it like friskier to get runs, and then just play that up and just own the pressure better, field better, bowl, like hit your areas of the ball better. And then World Cup final could have gone either way, quite obviously. Like we think of that team as like this in like the fantastic achievement, but they were coming into that in like a bit of not quite turmoil, but definitely a little bit disrupted going into that tournament, and weren't really like at their best through the group stages either. So there's a very nice blueprint there of how great performances from great players, and then just stepping up at the as a team when you need to. Like there's a great example there for the White Ferns to follow. Like it's not too complicated, the formula that they need to be successful, right? So plenty of hope I think you can derive from all that. I don't think that's a reach at all.
Everything you were referring to though was like players and playing the game, whereas and we have also noted that the Blackcaps in World Cups and tournaments and series, they are very good at incremental improvements and adapting to the range of conditions. So in like a World Test Championship, you got to be able to play solid cricket in a range of conditions, and in the game adapt to those conditions and the situation. Also hold that thought for the Blackcaps. So in a tournament, in that World Cup that you're talking about, 2019, like every game is an event for the Blackcaps. Every game is like a different pitch, different combination, different situation that we need to adapt to. And there's going to be a similar vibe here for the White Ferns, like just the range of pitches used in Aotearoa, because it's a World Cup. So every bloody city hosts a game, and you're going to have a variety of different conditions at your disposal to adapt to. And I'm intrigued as to how the White Ferns emulate the Blackcaps in that way, how they, or if they are able to roll through the tournament and adapt from pitch to pitch, if they can adapt to the situation and like, yeah, we lose early wickets and then we, salvage an innings together to make it competitive. And then you use the word shrink. And I don't think they were like shrinking it deliberately, like, yeah, we're going to score less runs and, tighten the game up that way. But the shrinkage is
condensing might have been a better word.
Yeah, well, shrinkage is fine, but they're not doing it intentionally with the runs. Like we scored less runs, so now we're going to adapt to that and apply pressure through that. I am curious to see how the White Ferns respond to such examples as well. They have the talent and they have it's a home conditions, home environment, all that stuff's in their favor. I'm curious to see if they can emulate the Blackcaps as far as, a certain level of mindfulness and adapting and staying present in the moment, as we always talk about, as well as to tactics, ideas, execution and stuff. It's important to mention the second game as well. That is against Bangladesh, and that is on Monday. So they play West Indies on Friday, Bangladesh on Monday, and then Variety Show on Tuesday. So as far as podcast goes, that's when I'll get in some updating the White Ferns. 2 very winnable games. Bangladesh, not one of the best women's teams, probably the lower end of the World Cup rankings. And then the third game next Thursday against India is probably a bigger test just to see where the White Ferns are at. Key players, key ideas that I'm thinking about to preview it. Amelia Kerr with the bat, and also Amelia Kerr with the ball, especially this Bay Oval pitch, because Amelia Kerr could be a dynamic weapon with her leggies. But then we'll see what kind of effect Amelia Kerr is going to have on this World Cup if she is bowling on a favorable deck, right? Like if she goes for 7 runs with 1 wicket, not an ideal start on a favorable deck, but she might just rip through the West Indies lineup, because that's also possible. All the big Donnies, the best players, got to keep an eye on them. And then it's kind of, I'm curious about the seam bowling department. I think Leah Tahuhu, Jess Kerr, and Hannah Rowe are going to be key figures. Jess Kerr is probably the best seamer overall. Leah Tahuhu is the headline act. She's the fastest bowler. She doesn't consistently dominate. So I think Jess Kerr is just kind of better. But they're, close enough. And then the Hannah Rowe position is fascinating as well. She's been quite good in ODI cricket recently. These are home conditions. And I think the White Ferns are going to lean into their seam bowling stocks in home conditions, and that places a higher importance on Hannah Rowe. And if they go towards that seam stuff, that places a higher importance on Amelia Kerr's bowling as well, given that she, in some of these games, she might be the lone spinner. And you might get a few overs from Satterthwaite, but they might select Amelia Kerr as the frontline #1 spinner, and then you've got a bunch of seamers to do a job as well. Alternatively, you could rely on, you've got all-round ability from Sophie Devine. So then you can also select a Frances Mackay in a spin bowling position down the order. Obviously, she can bat pretty good as well. So there's a range of combinations on display, which should help them adapt to the various pitches in Aotearoa. But I still think those Hannah Rowe, Amelia Kerr bowling positions will be crucial, in the same way that the middle order batting wise is going to be really important as well, because they will, some of the top batters in the world, Susie Bates, Sophie Devine, Amy Satterthwaite, Amelia Kerr, they will get good deliveries. They will have bad luck and they will get out early unless they're purely in dominant fashion. So then how does Katie Martin tie in innings together? Brooke Halliday might be important in that middle order as well. How do some of those batters batting number 5, 6, and 7 salvage innings or polish off an innings coming in 25 overs down, 30 overs down, 35 overs down? Because there's not a lot of power. Like, you do have Tahuhu, but it's one thing for her to blast sixes in the Super Smash, different beast trying to do it in a World Cup against some of the best bowlers in the world. So just a couple of key ideas to tap into there.
I suppose another thing that kind of works out in their favor as well is just kind of the state of the sport at the moment, because I think it's kind of like, is a little bit theoretical from me, but like, I think it's kind of like a transitional period in a lot of ways for women's sport in general, where there's like greater commercial opportunities are just suddenly becoming available. And it's not like it's not really been a gradual thing. It's been like give us better sponsors, give us better sponsors, give us better sponsors for like, 10, 15 years. And then all of a sudden better sponsors are turning up. And like, I don't think this is better, I don't know, valued anywhere than in women's football at the moment, where it's kind of like exploding commercially. But the issue with that is, the last World Cup, which was, I think, also in 2019, the last Women's Football World Cup, the quarterfinalists were 7 teams from Europe and the USA. Like, it's not like, you used to get Asian teams would do, like Japan have made World Cup finals and stuff, and things like that. Australia weren't as good at that tournament as they expected to be. Like, ultimately what you ended up with was just the places where the money goes. And because of the like tight condensed European like club things, Champions Leagues, and that's where the money is in the men's game as well. So there's an easy like flow on there of like top teams setting up their women's teams, putting a bit more money into them and investing in them and like that. Ultimately what you get is just like the big commercial powers lead to success, which is frustrating, especially as a New Zealander, because I think the football Ferns are a team that's like sort of struggling to cling on in that kind of way, where the game is getting so much better, but you're sort of on the outside looking in, and it's difficult to get enough players involved in some of those clubs just in order to catch up, and it's very hard to catch up because we're just not going to have the level of money that can go into it. Within the cricketing world, much smaller, and it seems relatively obvious that over the last like 5 years, Australia and then to a lesser extent England have just pulled away from the crowd, and it's probably for similar reasons, because there's more money and commercial value, et cetera, going into their women's cricket teams. India feels like an example of that not working, where like, there's been some kerfuffle lately about like, why don't they have a women's IPL? And there's no reason why they don't have a women's IPL, but old Matt Ganguly was just like, well, you got to have the players. And people were like, well, there's like 500 million women in India. I think you can find enough players for a cricket tournament. It shouldn't be that hard. You don't really have to overthink it that much. But like the White Ferns, probably because they've played against like Australia and England a lot, that's maybe been highlighted that they don't necessarily have the same investment as those countries have, and probably for like understandable reasons. Bigger countries, more money to spend. Like it's something we're always going to have to work at a deficit for to overcome. But like perhaps other countries, I mentioned India, obviously, Bangladesh, you mentioned before, not as heavy on the prowess there, probably for a similar reason. It's just not yet as like organized and funded as it will be in the future. West Indies, arguably a little bit in the similar. I mean, they've had all sorts of board dramas and stuff like that as well. So, mate, like what I'm saying is, perhaps the White Ferns are in a slightly it's an unfortunate place if you look at how they are compared to Australia and England. It's a fortunate place if you look at where they are compared to other countries, just because there is a bit more interest in and effort going into the White Ferns unit and taking them more seriously or whatever. I suspect that's something that'll serve them well in the group stage, particularly in home conditions as well. So that is, as I say, that's just like a bit of theoretical thinking from me, but we'll, see how that goes as well.
I would theorize further and kind of push back, because
fair enough.
Same thing like football and women's football. The football fans just play in those leagues, like there's no, yes, there is and same, this is all the same with cricket. Like there is an advantage. Yeah. If your nation has more money, there's more resource for that team and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, every other nation in the world has players in those leagues. And when you're getting into cricket, you're getting into record numbers of New Zealand players in the women's Big Bash. There's been an influx of South African players in the women's Big Bash. Last summer was massive for Indian players, because you didn't have the New Zealand players in the women's Big Bash. You go to England with their T20 Blast. Sure, that also helps the English women's team, but it presents professional opportunities to the West Indies, to Pakistan, to India, to New Zealand players. And I look at those big nations. I don't look at them as, I look at everyone else as taking advantage of them. I don't put them up as on a pedestal and say oh, they got the leagues, they're the best, they got the most money. No, everyone else is just fucking pillaging them. That's what happens. That's what happens with England and county cricket. County cricket is not preparing English players for Test cricket, but it's preparing New Zealand players, it's preparing Australian players. Pakistanis are going to England, West Indians are going to play county cricket. South Africans had a direct feed to England county cricket through the Kolpak situation that no longer exists. And I think that's a wider thought you can apply. You can look at the big corporates, you can look at capitalism or just the big donnies in any situation and put them up on a pedestal. You can also look at how they're being taken advantage of, how they're being used. And if you're a bit fuck the system, that might be an exciting idea to explore, because then you're taking the power away from them and you're putting the power in yourself and the little folk and the plebs. And so for this Women's World Cup, I actually think it's quite even. Yes, any sport, you're going to have a certified favorite. Australia are the certified favorite. They are the dominant force. They are what we know the All Blacks to be in rugby union. But Pakistan are solid. India are solid. South Africa are really good. West Indies are solid. These teams are all pretty solid. I actually have no idea what Bangladesh is like. So they might be solid. I'm just kind of assuming. And yeah, India, we whether we agree with the equality or whatnot, the cultural situations in India with women's cricket, that doesn't matter to the Indian players, because they just go play. Well, it does matter to them because it's important to them, blah, blah, blah. But as far as them elevating their game, they just go play Women's Big Bash League. They just go dominate there. I think there were record numbers of Indian players in the Women's Big Bash League this summer. So I actually believe through the rise of what you're talking about with the, regular big donnies, England and Australia in women's cricket, the rising tide has lifted all the ships, elevated them, because every other nation gets spots in those tournaments and the best players go play in those tournaments. And then those best players go back to their team and elevate their team. And yes, there's a long way to go. But we barely have professional systems in place here in Aotearoa. We are not the bastions of equality here. Super Rugby, women's Super Rugby is a kind of disgusting effort towards equality. Let's be honest. It's just a fucking random little window, sure, impacted by COVID, but you look over to Australia and again, we can break down the quality, but there's AFL Women's. There's the Women's Big Bash League that is like a peak event in their summer. It stands alone. Australia women get their own sponsorship. Australia women get their own views separate to the men's team. Their whole business is separate to the men's team. So that's how you get away from the argument of, okay, the Blackcaps are the team that brings in all the money to New Zealand cricket. So why should that money be invested into women's cricket? Well, obviously it's nice, it's sharing, like it's a good thing to do for starters. But then if the women's team is their own independent business, it doesn't matter what the men's team's doing. And that's what's happening in Australia, and their women's professional sporting movement is so far beyond Aotearoa. But women's cricket around the world benefits from those environments as well. And I am actually, maybe I'm talking myself into withholding judgment about women's cricket until the end of this World Cup, because I think things change a lot quickly. And I don't know if for some of I just don't know the landscape of women's cricket right now. Like, I don't know if it's just Australia and England. It might be Australia, England, India, New Zealand, and South Africa at the top. It might be South Africa are just the best team suddenly. Like, I don't know those things for certain. And that's, to me, that just adds intrigue to this World Cup, because then we're learning about the White Ferns. We're learning all the things that I've discussed about the White Ferns, which is a bit of an experiment in itself. Then we're learning about how the White Ferns fit into international women's cricket. And we're learning about international women's cricket and that landscape as well, which I think is quite interesting. Do you have a final response to that before we crack it into Blackcap?
Just like a couple very quick things. For one thing, it sounds like Pakistan might be the dark horses of this tournament from a couple of things that I've read. Like, they're a team that's flown very much under the radar. They did beat New Zealand the other day in a warm-up game, for what that's worth. That'll be interesting. Like, I think that is like a genuinely fascinating thing, is to see how the balance of like performance lies at this World Cup. Because I mean, I think it's safe to say that Australia and then England, like there's a gap between Australia and England as well, have pulled away from the crowd. But the reason why World Cups are interesting is because like they can be catalysts for something. Like, they can be the dawn of something else. Like, this might be like, you can say Australia and England are ahead of everyone else, but if they don't perform better than everyone else at this World Cup, then it's official. You can say that everyone has, like, other teams have caught up or closed the gap or whatever. Like, you can, this is when like performance is supposed to matter the most at a big tournament like that. So yeah, as I say, like, that's a catalyst. The one pushback I'd have to your pushback is like, the best players get to pop up in those tournaments and big bashes and in, you know, some of the European football leagues and things like that. I think like New Zealand has 2 players currently in the Women's Super League in England. So compare that to England have like probably 200 players in that competition. Like, obviously there's a much better environment, like for like growing and developing new players if you're in that country with that many professionals and like that kind of environment going on. Whereas we're only getting to exploit our best players. And so like there's a difference there, but it's not necessarily a difference that has to be reflected in international teams, particularly I think in the cricketing thing, because in this, like the pertinent example, the one that matters, what we're talking about, like if those best, like you only have 11 players who are playing at one time. So it doesn't matter necessarily what the future looks like, what kind of players you're developing, bringing through, how healthy the game is, whatever, in your country. Like, for the next month or so, the thing that matters is how good the best 11 players perform in these games. Like, this is the point at which everything else has to shy away for a little bit, and you just focus purely on how well the best players perform. And yeah, if those best players have been getting good experiences in the top leagues, then suddenly that becomes a massive advantage. And it does become like, I love that phrase, the rising tide lifts all ships. Always, whenever I hear that metaphor, I think that's a great metaphor. I've never not felt that. I don't know why. It's nice and evocative. But yeah, couple ideas there. I suppose we should talk some Blackcaps as well, though.
That hole in your head is really
I know
distracting.
the sun's like flickering up and down. I don't know what's going on. I'm gonna have to like just get some curtains for this room or something.
Maybe it's just God.
Maybe,
Um,
maybe. Sorry, a bullet hole
Wildcard.
or something.
I wrote about the Blackcaps Test series against South Africa, and there were two key ideas that I covered. The first of which is that the two lads who scored the fewest amount of runs for Aotearoa were the openers, Tom Latham and Will Young. They scored the least amount of runs for Aotearoa in this Test series, and they were part of a group of 5 batters or players who scored less than 20 runs. The other 3 were South African bowlers who played one test. So you got Sturman, Olivier, and Sapamla. So, like, I don't know, like, to me, it just displays how weird this test was. Like, some of the dismissals, like Tom Latham, Rabada's first over to Latham, I think, in the first innings of the second test, everything was down leg side. And
Yeah.
it kind of looked like a plan. It also looked like a good over to a right-hander, which tells me that he was just off to the left-hander. Everything was down the leg side. And Latham, my best opener in the world, fluffed a few of the shots and then nicked one down the leg side. And it was just very weird. And this is not the norm. Latham and Young have both been very good in this current World Test Championship cycle. They have scored runs more often than not prior to this series against South Africa. And here they are. Latham had 16 runs in 3 innings. Will Young had 11 runs in 3 innings. Will Young averaged 3.6. Tom Latham averaged 5.3. So why the fuck are we talking about bowlers batting when the blokes opening have failed miserably? And that is like, I'm not being negative about Latham and Young. That's just what it is. Like, you can't look at what they did and be like, oh, that was good. Like, no, they failed miserably. And the point is, that is not the norm. That is not the status quo. They have been very good up to this point. And then a lot of their dismissals were very strange in the type of way where you're like, okay, you know, the cricketing deities graced us with Laturu Taylor taking a wicket with the final moment of his Test career. The cricketing deities brought us Ajaz Patel, the Mumbai moment, return to Mumbai, 10 wickets in an innings. Fantastic, amazing. The opposite of that is very strange dismissals and just a wonky test from the Blackcaps. Like, that's the spectrum. That's the scale of cricket spirituality, right? It was not on the Blackcaps side for this test. I think like that Henry Nicholls dismissal where he went back to Keshav Maharaj and he just got bowled. Like, Nicholls doesn't do that. That doesn't happen. But it happened there, and I don't know why. But the point there is, what Latham and Young dished up in this test series is not the status quo. It's not the norm of this World Test Championship cycle, but it is the root of the Blackcaps' issues in that second test and this test series against South Africa, because Colin de Grandhomme, his century, Henry Nicholls' century, Tom Blundell, Conway scored runs, Neil Wagner scored runs, Daryl Mitchell scored runs, Matt Henry scored runs. Those dudes scored runs because they had to, because the openers were dismissed for single digits. So that just skews the whole test in favor of South Africa. If Latham gets 30 off 100 deliveries, we know that's job done here at the niche cage. So that's all good. Honkadori. But none of that happened. And they were like astronomically bad for whatever reason. And fair play. Like, I can see how people might want the bowlers to be better at batting. I've thrown the idea to you, Wildcard. Maybe you chuck a bat, like you put the bowlers up the top and you put the batsmen in down the order, to help rectify these situations. But your counterpoint, which is fantastic, is that you want your batsmen, your best batters, facing the most deliveries possible. And only one Blackcaps batter has faced over 900 deliveries in the World Test Championship. Tom Latham, he is the best batter, and he's facing the most deliveries. Great. Not for this series, though. So that is my one key idea. And it goes in conjunction with a lot of this noise about the bowlers batting. Fair play. If everyone else is scoring runs and then the bowlers aren't batting well, that is like a perfectly baked cake without any icing. It's just not good. Like, it might be okay, but if you don't have that beautiful chocolate icing on top, it's not as good. I cannot, like, in a logical sense, I can't talk about bowlers batting if the best batters haven't done their job. If the two blokes who are opening the batting haven't done their job. I can talk about bowlers batting if everything else is honky-dory. If blokes are scoring runs and then the deciding factor is reckless shots from some tail enders. Okay, I'll discuss it then. I can't discuss it when, like, the two blokes at the top of the order have had a very strange series, and I don't think those two have had a series in their careers that has been that bad. It's not normal, but it happened, and then it sets up that noise, just the static around bowlers batting. Because Wagner and Henry, they scored their runs because they had to, because the openers didn't do their job, right? Like, it's all intertwined. And I think I've got another idea to present to you, Wildcard, but I do want to get your thoughts on that one because I didn't see it discussed a lot anywhere, but it was so blatantly obvious that I had to make it a key point in wrapping up that test and series.
Yeah, like Neil Wagner scored 49 in the last test as a night watchman. Matt Henry got a not at like an unbeaten 50. Like, who's complaining about bowlers batting? That's like, those are good areas for bowlers chipping in with the bat there. And yeah, obviously second test was like, you know, damage was done higher up. Like, Tom Latham throughout this summer, the Bangladesh and South African series, he scored 252 runs in one innings, and his other 5 innings combined for 31 runs. No not outs in there either. So, like, with 5 innings, 31 runs is what, like, average of 6 and a little bit, 6.2, I guess. That's terrible. It's absolutely awful. And the fact that Young, where are we with Will Young? 186 runs at 31 overall. But most of those runs were scored against Bangladesh, as you said. Like, he struggled against South Africa. When they both do that, like, I think, what's the second test? They scored like 11 runs between them or something in 4 innings, something like psychopathically bad. That's not a recipe for success. Like, it's just that's awful. And they're like, those are 2 good batsmen, as you say, like 2 guys who were Latham is as good as anyone as a test match opener. Will Young has proven himself pretty handy in the early stages of his career. Like, the fact that that's what they served up, not just that either of them did that, but they both did that together in the South African series. I won't say it's a bad sign, because I think they're both 2 very good players, and I think that's going to be a great opening partnership for several years. But that's how you. That's a good start in terms of losing a test. Oh, not losing a test series, but not winning a test series. Certainly, in losing that second test, like, they just because how did South Africa struggle in that first test? They were losing early wickets every time. We're talking about this in between. Their openers didn't do much. Not just their openers, like their top 3 didn't really do anything in that first test. Second test, however, good partnership straight up there, and old. How do you say his name? Eve? It's spelled Irwi, and then everyone seems to have a different pronunciation. I'm sure it's like an Afrikaans thing, but he scores a really brilliant 100, and, you know, Markram chips in with a little bit of a start. He's been in terrible form recently, and like that, they set up the innings batting first at a time when everyone's like, you don't bat first in New Zealand. You just don't do that. Won the toss, bat first, and had good partnerships, like set a really nice platform with their top three to begin things, which is exactly what the Blackcaps did not do in either of those innings, which is why they found themselves behind at every point in the Test match. And ultimately that ended up in being bowled out in day 5 and losing the Test match and drawing the series. And still, since playing them for the very first time in the 1930s, still never having beaten South Africa in a Test series. I thought for sure this was the one where that would that like streak would finally end, but nope. South Africans pulled one out of the bag, and I have to wait another couple of years to try and end that crazy drought. But so it goes. But yeah, like when you get almost literally nothing from your openers, it's not a good way to win a Test match when you're trying to just like, you know, clinch a series victory. It's not a great way to go about it.
In the Patreon podcast, shout out, we discussed the little moment where Aidan Markram was batting, soaking up a lot of deliveries, not the counter-attacking number 3 that Brendan McCullum was hoping for. And we had a little yarn about that idea. Now that I'm thinking about it, like, none of those South African batters were overly intentful from an attacking perspective. Like Rassie van der Dussen shut up shop most of the time.
Yeah.
Dean Elgar is Tom Latham. Like, he's just pure, well, he's the South African version. So he's a bit grittier, a bit more mongrelly, but he is a similar version. And Irwi certainly wasn't. Again, I'm a bit more in tune with like Polynesian pronunciation. South African pronunciation is a bit of a weakness. So working on that one. Please forgive us.
It's better than Labuschagne.
Well, yeah. Well, who know? Well, the thing is, we don't know how these names are pronounced. Like, it could be any which way.
Neil Wagner did a thing once. So when we were touring in Australia, Neil Wagner did an interview where he referred to him just like without thinking about it, referred to him as Labuschagne. And then he's like, "Oh, sorry, you guys call him Labuschagne here, don't you?" There might be a clue. Although we call him Wagner, and it probably should be Wagner, right?
Who knows?
Yeah.
So, but the South African batters, they just soaked up deliveries. And yes, at some point they were attacking, like, you still got to score runs, you still need to hit the bad balls to the boundary, rotate the strike, all those ideas. But you compare them to what the New Zealand openers did, and it's night and day. You face deliveries, and that sets up your innings. That sets up attacking opportunities elsewhere for yourself or for other players in your lineup. And to me, yeah, a big difference between the two teams was the amount of deliveries faced by the top order, which, as we discuss, are your best batters, and you want your best batters facing the most deliveries. And if literally the best batter in the team, Tom Latham, what's he got? 67 deliveries. Saudi had 62. Will Young had 42. So the best batter in the team was among the fewest deliveries faced, which, given, if you compare that to the World Test Championship, and then you put in the context of just the general premise of the best batter facing the most deliveries, isn't in alignment, which I think is quite interesting. And it's also simple. And through the simplicity, as well as just a lot of weird shit happening wildcard, like, it wasn't like South Africa were emphatically outplayed Aotearoa. I think there were some serious lapses from Aotearoa that we don't usually get. So there's like, all of that is just like, okay, they lost this test and they drew the series, and it's a bit of a ho-hum summer, but there's a whole lot of other factors at play here where it's like, okay, let's keep it moving, just see how they respond. The second idea that I am interested in is just reflecting on this idea of spin bowling in Aotearoa Test cricket, because the Test summer started on the back of Ajaz Patel taking his 10 wickets. And there was some like misreading of the Bay Oval, I believe. Not to a great extent, because they still played Rachin Ravindra. And you saw after that Bay Oval test, they replaced Rachin Ravindra with Daryl Mitchell, I believe. And then both tests in Christchurch did not have a spinner. So like they did select the spinner for the most spinny deck in Aotearoa. However, it still feels like they misinterpreted what was happening there and how it all played in favor of Bangladesh. Like Bangladesh had the warm-up game and they had favorable conditions for themselves, whereas the Blackcaps were still kind of hell-bent on maybe forcing how they want to play cricket into conditions that didn't suit it. And looking back, I would rather have Ajaz Patel than Rachin Ravindra in that moment. Sure, like that opens a whole nother can of worms as far as selection and combination goes. But in hindsight, looking back, I think Ajaz Patel would have done pretty well on that Bay Oval pitch in conditions that suited him, as opposed to Rachin Ravindra, who was an opening batsman for Wellington, who bowls a bit of spin. Now we come into this South African series, and Hagley is like seamer paradise, right? True, like fair play, but it does skew a little, like it at least opens the door to a bit of spin if you're playing a second test in a row at Hagley. If like whether you're using the same pitch or not, like I don't need to go down that route and get super specific, but at least if you're playing on the same field, there is a slight embrace of spin. Like if you're going from like pure seam domination Hagley that we know and love, and what are the circumstances that it moves slightly towards spin? Either like 3 weeks of 30 degrees and sunshine, or you just play another test there a week later and it's like going to be a little bit more spinny. The first test, South Africa still played Aidan Markram to bowl. Like in their first innings, they bowled Aidan Markram as a spinner and he took a few cheeky wickets, but he was there. He got used as a spinning option. So South Africa already had a mindset that, okay, we're at least embracing a bit of spin. And then you go for the second test on a pitch that, or a deck, or I don't want to go, because I don't know for certain, but like you're playing on the same ground. What does South Africa do? They select Keshav Maharaj. Maharaj, who the last time South Africa went in Aotearoa, led all bowlers for the most wickets. And I included some stats about Maharaj. The best nations he bowls in are Aotearoa, West Indies, and Sri Lanka. One of those is seaming paradise. The other two are predominantly spin bowling conditions. So I don't know why the fuck Maharaj loves bowling in Aotearoa. Like no other spinner does in the history, apart from a little bit of Dan Vettori, right? Like you've explored this. It makes no sense. But for some reason, Maharaj loves bowling spin in Aotearoa. And that highlights another slight misread wildcard. Because, and again, this is all complicated. This is all complex because it's hard for me to discuss bowlers batting when the openers don't score runs. It's hard for me to throw up this idea of spin bowling interpretation when the test before the seamers dominated South Africa. So I can't be like, yeah, no, fuck those seamers, like get a spinner in when those seamers have done a fantastic job. But you are playing another test in quick succession at the same ground. So it does change it a little bit. But the point is that this is complex. It's complicated. I don't have an answer. I'm just processing in hindsight where Ajaz Patel fits in, because I think for that Bay Oval test, Ajaz Patel would have been useful. And I think on the second test at Hagley, Ajaz Patel would have been useful as well. You can look at Maharaj as like, he didn't dominate, but he finds some success in Aotearoa, which is like a massive doosra to your like equation of Aotearoa spin bowling. Like, I'm sure you're going to have to dive deeper into that one. B, he did a job for South Africa in the second test. Like, he took a couple wickets and he like offered a different look, which I think is interesting. And yeah, it's just like, this is the end of the test summer, and spin bowling is always like a main topic, even though there is none for Aotearoa test cricket, especially after how the test summer started with Ajaz Patel in the spotlight. And now we're here at the end of the test summer, looking back on test defeats, where I think, in hindsight, the luxury of hindsight, Ajaz Patel would have been kind of useful. And I think there's a case for both, a rather compelling case that he would have been useful in those two situations, which throws up two slight misreads from the Blackcaps, which I don't think are normal, like the lack of runs from the openers. Like, usually they are so crisp with their decision making, and it always tends to work out. Here it didn't. And then I'm like just curious about the wider context of a spinner operating in Aotearoa, because I think we have to keep an open mind. It is dependent on the pitch. It is dependent on conditions and circumstance, where for whatever reason you're playing a second test at Hagley in the space of a week, almost a bit over, and you're rolling out the same seamers, which just feels a bit like stale bready. They might do the job. We back them to do the job, but usually Trent Bolt's there and he helps them do the job. Usually Kane Williamson's there, adding his input. So those two are absent, so it is a bit different. And then you've got like conditions that are a little bit spinnier than usual at Hagley. And again, I'm just like kind of intrigued about how other people think about Ajaz Patel or any other spinner being a factor in Aotearoa, given what we have seen this summer.
Yeah, I'm not really sure where I sit on that, because like on the one hand, it's easy to like reverse engineer or look back, the old benefit of hindsight and say that. But then also, like, if Ajaz Patel had played, would it have made a difference? Was that like a deciding factor in the first test loss to Bangladesh? I suspect not. He might have chipped in with a couple nice wickets that would have otherwise been taken by seamers. You know what I mean?
I'd say Ajaz Patel would have been a factor in both.
In the first test and the fourth test, are you saying? Or
yeah, I'm both are test defeats, and both defeats came in conditions that were, again, not dominant spin conditions, but a little bit spinny, and the most spinny conditions of the summer, which I don't think is a coincidence.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was two tests in the space of like a little over a week. It was also 3 tests in a row, wasn't it, in Christchurch? Because I think Hagley had the second Bangladesh test as well. But like the middle two of those were exactly what the Blackcaps, like dominant wins, both of them, where the seam bowlers took a heap of wickets and everything. But you do make a very good point, which is that the deeper you get into the summer and the more like it's not like if the games are being played on the wicket, there's only so much like prep and stuff you can do, right? They're preparing a second pitch for the second test because they didn't play on the same one. I assume they played on a third one as well in the first one. I'm not sure if they had 2 different ones for those 2 tests. I'm assuming they had a different one for the test before that a month earlier. Like if the weather, as it mostly was nice and hot and sunny, then yeah, it is going to be drier. And later on in the summer, like the last test of those is going to be the best of a bad bunch as far as spinning goes. I guess the elephant in the room and the point with the AJ Patel as well is to say, like, we're talking hypothetically, because I'm pretty sure he was injured for the whole lot of them, so he wasn't technically available. We're just talking about if he had been, because I don't think I don't know if that would have made a difference. It's tricky because on the one hand, like, so if I'm in that situation as trying to select that team for the first test against Bangladesh, I'm saying if you want to pick a spinner, you pick your best spinner. You don't pick Rachim Ravindra, an opening batsman, and tell him to bat 7 and be like your spin option, because he's a batsman by trade. He's a good spin bowler. Like, he's going to become a pretty handy option internationally. He's never going to be a strike bowler. It's not going to be that kind of. And what did he do? I've got the figures here for the summer. 28 overs, none for 67. So it's not like he was a threat there in that game. It's not like he changed things. Obviously, Ajaz Patel would have done more because he's a better spinner, because he takes more wickets, because he's just going to offer more of a threat. So I think they got caught in between there, and that's an issue I have. I can understand them not picking Ajaz Patel in that thing, especially not knowing how that test would go. Ordinarily, you expect the Blackcaps to smash Bangladesh. They did it in the second test. The first test was just one of the great upsets in Test cricket history, really, when you consider everything that went into that, and like the history of Bangladesh and them traveling here and how the Blackcaps have been going. You want to chip in on that?
Well, there's a big difference between conditions, right?
Between Maunganui and Christchurch, or?
Yeah, like the two tests, Bangladesh at Bay Oval, Bangladesh and Hagley, vastly different like paradigms of Aotearoa cricket.
Yeah, and we saw that in the results, didn't we? So, this was a truly weird summer of Test cricket, because the Blackcaps had 2 really convincing wins, and also 2 relatively convincing defeats. Like, they really swung the pendulum to both ends, like pretty extreme there. It's pretty weird. There was one spinner, of course, who took a wicket this summer, the only spinner who took a wicket. I'm sure you can remember who that was for the Blackcaps. None other than the retiree himself. And you only needed 3 balls to do it. Like, I'm not sure how I would go. I'm not sure whether I still like, because it's too easy to say afterwards that Ajaz Patel would have done nicely. You got to think about where they were going into that first test. If ever he was going to play one of these test matches, that was the one. But I don't know. I don't know if I would have been disappointed if they hadn't, had he been available even still. I think the big issue is the compromise of being like, well, we want to pick a spinner, so we're just going to pick this part-time option, bat him at 7 sort of thing. I think that's more the issue, is you got to do one or the other. Like, you can't be half in. You can't be half pregnant. Like, you're either pregnant or you're not. That's a thing that I didn't particularly enjoy. But I don't, like, with Patel injured, I'm not sure who the alternative was. So I guess Mitchell Santner. But maybe Mitchell Santner would have done a good job at bowling at Maunganui. I don't know. That's where I think this gets really interesting, is the South African perspective, because I don't think they picked Aiden Markram in the idea that, I mean, he's in the team as a batsman. I don't think they had the idea that he would be a spinner until the game was getting beyond them, because it's not like he was bowling early overs or anything like that. They chucked him in at a point where they were sort of, well, they wanted to buy a wicket and they got one because Colin de Gronholm smacked him to long on and got out nice and quick, and they got another one as well. I can't remember if that was before or after. They sort of just went to him because they were like, we need another option. And I think because he got a couple wickets, that convinced them to pick Maharaj in the next test match. I think that was probably a tipping point for them, I suspect at least. And that worked out quite well for them. But then also at the same time, like, Kagiso Rabada was the guy coming in and getting the openers out. Like, that was where the initial damage was done, and Blackcaps are playing from behind at any point. You can bring on a spinner and attack with him if you're bowling at a team who's like 90 for 5 or whatever, like it's a little bit more fortunate for him to come in and bowl in those scenarios. But then also some of the wickets he got were like legit test match, like the Henry Nichols one, spinning it back on him and catching him, like not sure whether to come forward or go back. And then he ends up going back, but too late, ball spun on nicely. And he bowled some rippers, like he bowled really well. But I don't know. I don't know that the Blackcaps had a comparable option available. I wish if Ajaz Patel had been healthy, that might have made it nice and interesting on that one. But like he wasn't, and I don't know. I don't know. I suspect they wouldn't have picked him in a Christchurch test anyway. And I also think, again, like I just find it hard not to lean back on the batsmen as the ones who failed the most in this test match. And also, I don't know, the early partnerships for South Africa in that first innings too, like not taking day one wickets, bowling first is generally not a great recipe either. So I don't know. There's a few different things, but overall, like looking I'm honestly like struck by this, just what a weird summer it was, like how the contrast in results from the Blackcaps test matches. And yeah, I think if there's I think if there's like a lesson to be learned overall from this test summer, it is the value of the third test match, 3 test series. It just feels like both those series were kind of unfinished businesses without getting a third like decider. And then also the value of warm-up games, because Bangladesh had a warm-up game and the exact conditions that the first test was at, and they came out, played brilliantly. South Africa didn't get a warm-up game, played pretty average in the first test, batted especially average, like just terrible. Bowled out for 95 on day one is pretty awful way to start a series. But with that game in the bag, way better, like miles better in the second test match. If only these tours were just able to be a little bit longer, so that South Africa could have had a warm-up game earlier on, and then also we could have had a third test to really decide things, and on both counts too, because Bangladesh deserved a third test after winning the first one. It's a shame how these things go. It's like people make a thing about the fact that New Zealand hasn't played like a 5-test series since like the 70s or something. I don't care about 5-test series. 5-test series actually get kind of boring after a while. The Ashes are probably too long half the time, especially because they seem to be one-sided a lot. The last one certainly was. 3-test series though would be nice. 3 tests, like a third test. Like give us a third test. We can the Blackcaps are worth it, right? You can't even really call a 2-test series a series is the problem, but. Yeah, Craig McMillan was hammering home about that on the last test match, and I was sitting there being like, "You're goddamn right, Craig. That's exactly it. Like, there should be a third test. We need more 3-test series." But I don't know if we'll be so lucky when the next schedules come around. I don't know if that'll be something that'll benefit us, but I do think that other teams will have noticed the fact that Bangladesh had a warm-up game and were quite good, and South Africa didn't have a warm-up game and then needed to basically have the first test as a throwaway to get into their stride. Don't think that's coincidental, and I think other teams have probably noticed that, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes when further teams come into tour in subsequent summers, and how the Blackcaps will use that. Like, will they have warm-up games when they go to England? That'll, that kind of thing.
So you're talking about like what a strange summer as far as results go and performances. For some reason, it's just super clear in my mind. The tests they lost were in the most spinny possible conditions. But I don't think it's rocket science. Like the Bay Oval, Bangladesh were better equipped for those conditions than the Blackcaps. South Africa were better equipped for the second test conditions than the Blackcaps. Like, of course, Aidan Markram wasn't selected to bowl spin, but there was a willingness to bowl him, which to me showed that South Africa were at least in the mindset of perhaps a more typical playing 11 that we expect in Test cricket, which then opened the door for Maharaj in the second test. And my point here is that in both the first test against Bangladesh and the second test against South Africa, the winners of those tests read the situation better than the Blackcaps. So yes, the margins and the results are strange and funky, but the circumstances are similar. So I don't think it's that, like, what I'm learning is, like, maybe I kind of think like the Blackcaps forced their structure into conditions that it didn't really need, like square peg into a round hole type of thing. And their opponents made the right decisions for those tests. Hence they won. And the tests that the Blackcaps won were regular Blackcap structure tests, seam bowling conditions, bat once, go big type of things. Tom Latham gets a double century, and then you roll the team for 100 and 150 runs. Those are regular scheduled programming for Blackcaps and Aotearoa. With the test that the Blackcaps lost, moved away from that traditional structure, or that like recently developed structure that has led to a lot of success. And I don't think that is a surprise. I don't think that is a coincidence. I think that is a learning that there still needs to be, like we celebrated Blackcaps adaptation. We celebrated the Blackcaps tinkering their playing 11 to suit the conditions. And yeah, like, how do you fit in Ajaz Patel or Rachin Ravindra, or like how do you bring back Kane Williamson into this batting lineup? Like, he needs to be there, but you need to drop someone. Like, these are all fascinating ideas that I can't be fucked thinking about. Like, I literally CBF thinking about the makeup of a bowling attack, right? There's just too many good options, and that's a great problem to have. But I think the key takeaway from the summer is that there still needs to be adapting to conditions, because the Blackcaps in the summer basically forced their ideals onto the conditions, onto the opponent. Didn't work against Bangladesh in that first test, didn't work against South Africa in the second test. And how that idea applies to a winning team, like from the first test against South Africa to the second test, I think that's a different kettle of fish. Like, it takes some balls to change the bowling lineup after being so successful. But the point is that you're showing those balls and adapting, and you're not necessarily forcing the same team onto different conditions. Because, yeah, once again, Bangladesh won the first test in adapting to those conditions. South Africa won the second test, adapting to those conditions. And the Blackcaps were fantastic in favorable Aotearoa conditions. As soon as those conditions ventured away from typical Aotearoa conditions that they dominate in, they lost those tests. And I think it's more in the microscope without Kane Williamson and Trent Boult. Because if you got those two, I think those tests that they lost probably are draws. But when you take away your two best players, it's going to have an impact on team performance, and then those draws become losses. And you learn from your losses, and I'm learning that in Aotearoa, there still needs to be some tinkering. There still needs to be learning from the conditions, adapting to the conditions, as opposed to trying to force this seam dominant idea onto conditions that offer something a bit different as well. Any last thoughts before we wrap up the podcast?
The Blackcaps are a conservative team by nature, aren't they? Like, they don't like to rotate a lot of things. They tend to like to play a certain way, and the adaptations that we're talking about are little things within that sort of like the same structure, and that's how they win test matches, and it's like why they're consistent and whatever. But it does lead to some like conservatism, where I think you're probably right. I think they probably did talk themselves into a place where they'd made a bold call initially to, like, last couple of summers, to stop assuming they have to pick a spinner but then maybe they got to the point where they started thinking like, we don't ever have to pick a spinner, and maybe that was an issue. Like maybe they went a little bit too far on that. Having said that, I was also just thinking about the Aiden Markram thing, because it's like, yes, but also the Blackcaps just straight up don't have that option. Like they were talking in the commentaries about, oh, maybe Tom Blundell needs to take the gloves off and bowl some off spin because he's the only one who can, like, he might be their best spin bowling options. Like they actually don't have a part-timer at the moment, with the Kane Williamson not on the team. They don't have a part-timer who can bowl spin. Like maybe Daryl Mitchell just needs to reinvent himself as a spinner because he doesn't seem to bowl much in test matches. So maybe he could be one of those dudes like, who was like, one of the dudes from
Liam Phillips
from England. Who was it? Who bowls seam, but he can also bowl some spin. I can't remember.
Ollie Robinson.
Was it? Yeah, Ollie Robinson. Yeah, bowled a little bit of spin when he needed to in the 2020 stuff. Yeah, a little bit of that. Like his solid medium paces in like 2020s when he's a little bit more of a a sneakily handy death bowling option sometimes. And longer form stuff, work on some offies to see how it goes. Maybe that's a solution. I don't know, but I can't help but feel like the spin bowling factors, though, less so in the Bangladesh one, because obviously Bangladesh, if they're doing well, they're going to need their spin bowlers to perform because that's where the strength of their team is in some ways. Although it was Ibido, wasn't it, who was taking all the wickets, like literal military from the Air Force or something like that. Fast medium pacer guy taking 6 for or whatever it was in that first innings. I can't help but feel like the spin factor was a little bit further down the chain of events that led to the Blackcaps losing those two. It was part of it. It's certainly a factor. I think though it's all part of the same thing of what you like, the same overall theme of the Blackcaps got outthought in terms of reading the conditions. I think the best example of that in the South Africa second test victory isn't so much that they picked Maharaj, who, that's like, as I say, like that's part of the chain. I think it's a couple of steps down, but I think the best example of that was Dean Elgar winning the toss and batting first. Like I think that was the best example of them reading the conditions better, where maybe, like, as the Blackcaps said, Tom Latham said he would have bowled first, because that's the thing to do. It's Christchurch. It's a seam bowling paradise. You bowl first, you get your seamers out there with the new ball and take some early wickets. We got what we wanted. We lost the toss, but still got what we wanted, and did not take early wickets. Like they set it like a good platform from their top three, who had failed pretty miserably in the first test match. Like, first of all, full credit to Elgar for having the balls to do that. Like, that's a gutsy call. But second of all, like, you can only look back at it now and say, like, because it worked out as well as it did, he did the right thing. He assessed the conditions better. He made a more effective call, and that set the tone for the entire test match to come. So I think that's like a great example of exactly what you're saying about the Blackcaps just maybe, I don't know, fell within themselves. I also do like the other thing I do want to ask, you sort of answered it, but to chuck it out again, like I just wonder how much difference we would have seen had they not been down a couple players. Like Kane Williamson, Trem Bolt, obviously. VJ Watling would have been very handy in the South African series as someone who can like arrest the collapse. Had he not just retired, Ross Taylor's retired in the middle of these tests. Like there is a little bit of a changing of the guard, not that much. Like it's more the injuries to Bolt and the injury to Williamson and the unavailability of Bolt was a little more I think the two biggest things. But it is worth mentioning they were down a couple guys. As I say, a conservative team doesn't really like to rotate too much in test match cricket, and that's, in general, a good thing. Like that's how you be a good test team. This is also maybe a good example of why they don't want to rotate too much, but I can't help but feel as well that's also a major factor. And but I wonder how different it would have been. I don't know. Like, would Kane Williamson have saved things? You said they might have been able to get draws in those test matches instead of losses. That might well be true, but yeah, we don't know is the issue. And I just wonder how much of that was a factor, especially because those are like the leaders of the batting and the bowling crew as well as your captain. I think maybe those were bigger losses than just the runs and wickets they would have provided as well. So I don't know, but it's probably worth hammering home that point as well, that they were down a couple important, very important players.
Yeah, like I think it's for lack of a better term, wrong to be like, oh, what's if Williamson and Bolt were there? But the point here is that if you lose two of your best players, and so like, yeah, just leave Watling and Taylor out of it from the group who are test players right now. If you take away two players who are also respectively among Aotearoa's greatest ever cricketers, like everything about the team adjusts. And I think anytime the Blackcaps are playing without players of that caliber, we're talking Latham, Williamson, Bolt, Southey, maybe Wagner as well, but I don't know. He's definitely one of the Aotearoa's greatest, so respect, and he should be there. Anytime, like moving forward, anytime the Blackcaps are playing without those players, the potential, and I said this in my debrief, the potential ceiling for that test or that test series or what's possible drops. The beauty is that Aotearoa's depth ensures that the floor stays pretty solid. And which didn't actually play out in this series because the floor was increased from a draw to a loss, which is a bit dumb.
It's the margin of error as much as anything, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's just like the whole expectation has to change. Like the Blackcaps are an elite international team when as many as possible of Aotearoa's greatest available players are there. If you take away one of those players, things have to change a bit. If you take away two of those players, things have to change a bit more. And I think, like, excuse me, in summary, the Blackcaps leave this summer in a pretty healthy position. Williamson has barely played cricket. Trent Bolt wasn't much of a factor. He wasn't a factor against South Africa. Blackcaps were 2-2. And now it's like, okay, let's move forward in this World Test Championship cycle. Let's get to England and fuck England up with our best available team. Let's try and really dominate some easier series coming up as part of the World Test Championship cycle with our best players on the field as well. Plenty of Aotearoa sporting yarns going down at theniche-case.com. We'll be back on Monday with another Patreon podcast, email banger Friday night, tomorrow night, and then back with the variety show Tuesday evening as well. Kia kaha, stay beautiful. Cheer.